When Riley Monroe inherited her father's dilapidated factory, she had no idea that what looked like a worthless piece of property would lead her into a dangerous and life-changing discovery. The crumbling walls and rusted machinery seemed like a burden she'd never be able to lift. But beneath the factory's decaying floorboards, a secret was waiting, one that would forever change her future. The discovery wasn't just treasure. It was a story of loss, hidden secrets, and a legacy her father had never shared. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode uncovers even darker secrets buried within these walls. Let's get started. Riley Monroe stood at the edge of the factory lot, her boots sinking into the cracked concrete with each step. The morning sun barely pierced the thick, stagnant air. The place had been abandoned for decades, and it showed. The factory, once a symbol of prosperity, was now a broken skeleton of its former self. Its towering walls were covered in ivy. The roof sagged under years of neglect, and the large metal gates that once welcomed workers now creaked and groaned in the breeze. Riley had inherited the place 2 weeks ago when her father passed away, and she hadn't stepped foot inside since. Her father had never spoken much about the factory, except for the occasional comment about what it used to be. She assumed it had been a good investment at some point, a place that made him proud, but it hadn't seen life in years. Her mind raced as she approached the main entrance, clutching the rusted keys her father had left her in his will. The smell of mold and rust hit her as she pushed open the heavy door. It groaned in protest, as if the building itself resented her intrusion. Inside, dust danced in the thin beams of light that managed to break through the cracks in the old windows. Machines, covered in layers of grime and cobwebs, sat silently, abandoned like the rest of the factory. The floors were littered with debris, broken windows, and forgotten tools. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Riley had no intention of staying long. The factory was too much of a mess for her to take on, and she wasn't even sure it had any real value. But as she walked deeper into the building, something felt off. There was a heaviness in the air, a presence that she couldn't shake. It was as though the factory itself was waiting for something or someone. She made her way toward the back of the building where the old offices were. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and she paused, listening to the eerie silence that had filled the space for so many years. Riley didn't know why she felt the need to explore, but her instincts told her to keep going. At the back of the factory there was a small door, barely noticeable, hidden behind piles of old equipment. Riley walked over to it, and, with a deep breath, turned the handle. It opened easily, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down into darkness. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something unsettling about the unknown, but curiosity pushed her forward. The staircase descended into what felt like another world. The air grew cooler as she reached the bottom, and she stumbled slightly as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. The walls were lined with old pipes, and the floor was wet in places, as if the factory had once been flooded. But what caught her eye wasn't the dampness, it was the floor itself. At the far corner of the room, a section of the concrete was slightly raised, as though something was buried underneath. Her heart skipped a beat. She knelt down, dusting off the dirt and debris. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A metal grate, rusted and worn, was embedded into the floor. Riley's pulse quickened. What was this? Why had her father never mentioned it? What could be hidden beneath the factory, in this forgotten corner? As her hands gripped the metal, she realized she wasn't just uncovering a hidden space. She was unlocking the first piece of a puzzle that had been buried for decades. The answers were just beneath her feet, and she had no idea what it would cost her to find them. Riley's hands trembled as she pried the rusted grate from the floor. It wasn't easy, the metal resisting every tug, but her determination won out. The sound of grinding metal echoed in the empty room as the grate finally gave way, revealing a narrow, darkened passage below. The air that rushed up from the hole was musty, stale, as if it had been trapped down there for years. Riley leaned in closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from her flashlight, making it impossible to see what lay beyond. She took a deep breath and lowered herself into the hole, her fingers brushing against the cool stone walls. The space was tight, but it felt safe, like stepping into a forgotten part of history. The staircase was steep, and Riley's footfalls echoed ominously as she descended further into the shadows. She had no idea what she was looking for, or what she might find, but she couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. The factory had been silent for years. No one had bothered to come here, not in decades. Yet here she was, about to uncover something hidden away for reasons she couldn't yet understand. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened up into a large, cavernous space. Her flashlight flickered as it illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Old crates, rusted equipment, and piles of forgotten junk littered the floor. But what caught her attention wasn't the debris. It was the large, wooden door at the far end of the room. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but there was something strangely pristine about it. Riley walked toward it, her every step echoing in the hollow space. As she approached, the door seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't explain. It was as if it had been waiting for her all this time. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing against the cold, weathered wood. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what lay beyond. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. Her flashlight swept over the space, and what she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. Stacks of old, dusty boxes filled the room, but it wasn't the boxes that made her blood run cold. It was the sight of the floor covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt. Yes, but also something else. A glint of gold caught her eye, barely visible beneath the grime. She knelt down, her heart racing as she brushed aside the dirt to reveal a large, solid gold bar, gleaming in the faint light. Riley's breath caught in her throat. She ran her fingers over the bar, its smooth surface cold to the touch. There was no mistaking it, this was real. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was seeing. How was it possible? Why was this here? Her mind raced as she stood up and scanned the room. The gold bars were stacked in neat piles, hundreds of them, as if someone had been storing them here for years. But why? What was the story behind this hidden treasure? She glanced around nervously, feeling a sense of unease creeping over her. There had to be an explanation. Her father had never mentioned anything about gold had he known. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps above made her freeze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood still, listening to the faint noise. Was someone else here? She couldn't be caught down here, not now. Not with the treasure she had just uncovered. Riley's mind was racing as she scrambled back toward the staircase. She had to get out of here. The gold, the factory, her father's secrets, everything was unraveling faster than she could keep up. But as she ascended the stairs, one thought kept running through her mind. Who had hidden this here? And what did they want her to find? Riley's mind raced as she made her way back to the main floor of the factory, her pulse pounding in her ears. The gold bars she'd found shimmered in her mind, each one an anchor pulling her deeper into the mystery of this place. She didn't know what it all meant, but she felt certain that her discovery was only the beginning. The factory, her father's legacy, was filled with secrets, secrets that had been buried for a reason. Once she reached the main level, she paused, trying to steady her breathing. The silence of the factory was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the wind outside. She could hear the faint rustle of ivy scraping against the walls, but nothing else. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She needed answers. And for the first time since inheriting the factory, Riley felt a sense of urgency. There was something more to this place, something that tied her father to these secrets, something that she couldn't ignore. She moved quickly toward her father's office, the place where he'd always retreated when he needed time alone. The door was still locked, just as she'd left it when she'd arrived 2 weeks ago. She had avoided it since then, unsure of what she might find inside. But now, There was no avoiding it. She had to know what was hidden in his personal files. The key to the office was the same one that had unlocked the factory's front door, worn from years of use but still functional. Riley inserted the key into the lock, the metal scraping loudly against the brass. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The office was dark, dust-covered, and untouched by time. A large oak desk stood in the center of the room, papers and files scattered across it in a disorganized mess. It was clear that her father hadn't spent much time here in his final years. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old books, photographs, and mementos from the factory's glory days. But it was the safe behind the desk that caught her attention. The safe was large, steel, and old, just like everything else in the room. It looked like something out of a bygone era, something that didn't belong in the modern world. Riley moved closer, her fingers brushing the cold metal as she inspected it. The safe had a combination lock, the kind her father would have set years ago, long before she'd ever considered inheriting the factory. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. Could this hold more answers? Or was it another dead end, like everything else in this place? She didn't know, but the gold had changed everything. She had to open it. After several attempts, she finally managed to crack the combination. The door to the safe swung open with a low groan, revealing a stack of old manila envelopes. Each one was marked with a date, some as far back as 20 years ago. Riley hesitated, her fingers hovering over the files. She knew these documents were significant. Her father wouldn't have kept them hidden away like this unless they held important information. She pulled out the top envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were a series of old photographs, yellowed with age. Riley flipped through them quickly, her heart racing with each one. There were pictures of the factory and its prime workers in uniforms, assembly lines full of activity, and her father, smiling proudly in front of the building. But it wasn't the photos that caught her attention. It was the last picture in the stack. It showed a man she didn't recognize, standing in front of the factory with a briefcase in hand. His face was obscured, but his posture and the way he held himself suggested that he was someone important, someone Riley's father had known well. On the back of the photo was a single word: Alistair. Riley's stomach dropped. The name meant nothing to her, but the fact that it was written so deliberately made her uneasy. Who was Alistair, and what did he have to do with the factory? Why had her father kept this photograph hidden? She sifted through the rest of the envelopes, pulling out more photos and documents. Some were financial records, some were letters, but they all pointed to something bigger, something her father had been a part of that she didn't understand. It was clear that the gold she had found in the factory was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. As Riley sat at her father's desk, a wave of realization washed over her. Her father hadn't just owned this factory. He had been involved in something far more dangerous and far more valuable than she ever could have imagined. And now, it was up to her to uncover the truth. But there was one thing Riley knew for sure. She wasn't the only one looking for answers. Someone, or something, was waiting for her to finish what had been started all those years ago. Riley's mind spun as she sat in the dimly lit office, the stack of photographs and documents scattered across the desk in front of her. The man in the photograph, Alistair, had left an unsettling impression on her, but it wasn't just the name that gnawed at her. It was the secretive air that seemed to hang over her father's life, one she'd never been told about. He had kept so much hidden from her, and now it was up to her to piece together the fragments of a life she didn't fully understand. The safe had given her only a glimpse into the depths of the mystery, but there was still so much she didn't know. Why had her father kept all of this locked away? And what role had Alistair played in the factory's downfall? More importantly, what had happened to the gold? A sharp knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Riley quickly shoved the files back into the envelope and stuffed it into her bag. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard, not now. Her hand hesitated over the door handle as she heard footsteps approaching. "Riley, you in there?" It was Matt, a former employee of the factory who had stayed behind after it closed down. He had been helping her clear out the place, though he hadn't shown much interest in the history of it all. He was just here for the paycheck, nothing more. Still, his presence was a comfort, a distraction from the increasingly surreal reality she found herself facing. Riley opened the door, forcing a smile. "Hey, Matt. What's up? I was just finishing up in the back and thought I'd check in. You okay? You look a little distracted." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing herself to sound casual. "Just going through some of Dad's old stuff. You know how it is." Matt raised an eyebrow, but didn't push the issue. "Yeah, sure. I'll finish up outside. Let me know if you need anything." As he turned to leave, Riley couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in the way he looked at her, a flicker of suspicion, maybe even fear. Was he watching her more closely than she realized? Once the door closed behind him, Riley let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She knew something had changed. The gold, the photographs, and the name Alistair had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. But she couldn't turn back now. Too much was at stake. Riley sat back down at the desk and pulled out the envelope again. She needed to go through everything more carefully. There had to be something more to this. After flipping through a few more pages, her eyes landed on a map tucked between two financial documents. It was hand-drawn, faded with age, but the details were clear enough. The map marked the location of a building on the factory's grounds, hidden behind a series of large warehouses. Riley's finger traced the map, a knot tightening in her stomach as she realized the marked building was not one she had ever seen before. It wasn't part of the main factory complex, nor was it listed in any of the documents she had. The building was small, inconspicuous, and located at the far end of the property, where no one had ever gone. A chill ran down her spine. Why had her father kept this hidden? What was in that building? She grabbed her jacket and hurried out of the office, her heart pounding. She needed to see it for herself. The factory may have been abandoned, but it was still hers. And she wasn't about to leave any stone unturned. As she walked toward the back of the factory, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. Every step felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The building in the corner of the lot loomed ahead, its windows boarded up, and its structure almost forgotten. Yet something about it felt different now. The air seemed thicker, the ground underfoot softer, as though it were waiting for her to approach. Riley stopped, just short of the entrance, staring at the door. It was made of thick steel, rusted and bolted shut. But the map had indicated this was the place. There was no mistaking it. She grabbed a crowbar from a nearby pile of discarded tools and pried at the door, the metal screeching as she worked. Her muscles ached with the effort, but she was determined. The noise echoed through the lot, and she flinched at the sound, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Matt hadn't heard her. But the factory was as silent as ever, the stillness almost suffocating. Finally, the door gave way with a heavy groan. Riley pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was cold and damp, filled with the scent of old metal and mildew. Her flashlight revealed what looked like a storage space, with shelves stacked high with boxes and crates. But in the far corner, hidden under a dusty tarp, was something that took Riley's breath away. A massive safe, nearly twice the size of the one in her father's office. It was older than the others, and its combination lock was far more intricate. She knew immediately that this wasn't just a storage room. It was something else entirely. Riley's hands shook as she approached the safe. She didn't know what she would find inside, perhaps more gold, more documents, or even something more dangerous, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the heart of the mystery, and it would reveal the truth that her father had worked so hard to keep hidden. But the deeper she went into the factory's secrets, the more she realized that some truths came at a price, and she might not be the only one willing to pay it. Riley stood frozen in front of the massive safe, the beam of her flashlight trembling in her grip. It was impossible to ignore the weight of the situation. The safe, sitting like a dormant giant in the corner of the room, seemed to radiate an energy all its own. It was a relic from another time, one that didn't belong in the factory, and certainly not in this forgotten space. Her mind raced, What could be inside this one? More gold, more photos. The answers to the questions that were piling up by the second, or something worse. She moved closer to the safe, every step echoing in the silence of the room. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The heavy lock was different from the one in her father's office, far more complicated. Its mechanism something Riley couldn't hope to figure out on her own. But something inside her whispered to keep going. She wasn't about to back down now, not after everything she had already uncovered. She ran her fingers over the lock, the cold steel smooth beneath her fingertips. She tried every possible combination that came to mind, but nothing worked. Frustration bubbled in her chest. She was so close, but the safe remained as stubborn as the secrets her father had kept. She stepped back, staring at it, willing the lock to open, wishing for the answers she so desperately needed. But no matter how much she willed it, the safe remained shut. That was when she heard the footsteps. Light at first, then growing louder, more deliberate. Someone was coming. Riley's heart skipped a beat, the sudden intrusion jolting her from her thoughts. She didn't have time to think, only to react. She grabbed the crowbar, hiding it behind her back as she turned toward the door. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Matt? A stranger? She didn't know. But one thing was certain: she couldn't let anyone know what she had found. Not yet. Not until she had answers. The footsteps drew closer, and then a voice called out, echoing through the room. Riley? Her blood ran cold. It was Matt. But why would he be here? She stepped into the shadows, her breath catching in her throat. She held perfectly still, listening intently. Riley, I saw the door was open. Are you down here? Matt's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that she hadn't heard before. A tension, a wariness that made her instincts scream. She couldn't hide forever. Slowly, she stepped out of the shadows, the crowbar still in hand, ready to defend herself if she needed to. Matt was standing just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. When they landed on her, they narrowed with suspicion. What are you doing down here? He asked, his tone now sharp, almost accusatory. Riley swallowed hard. She knew she had to tread carefully. She couldn't tell him the full truth, not yet. She had no idea if she could trust him. I was just exploring, she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled slightly. You know, checking out the old parts of the factory. Matt didn't seem convinced. His gaze flickered to the safe, then back to Riley. Exploring? He repeated, his voice laced with doubt. I don't think this is just exploring, Riley. You've been here a lot longer than you've let on. What's really going on? Riley's heart pounded. She didn't know if she could keep up the lie for much longer, especially not with Matt's sharp eyes trained on her. The suspicion in his voice, the way he was looking at her. It was as though he already knew something she didn't. I told you, I'm just trying to figure things out, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. This place, the factory, it's all a mess. I need to know what happened here. Matt took a step closer, his eyes not leaving hers. You're sure that's all you're looking for? Riley nodded, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Yeah, that's it. But Matt didn't seem reassured. He was silent for a moment, studying her carefully. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. You don't get it, do you, Riley? This place, it's not just a factory. There's more to it than you think. People have been looking for answers here for a long time. And not just your father. Riley froze. His words were like a punch to the gut, and she could feel the weight of his meaning settle in her chest. What was he saying? Who else had been looking? Before she could ask, Matt turned, his eyes filled with something that looked like regret. I shouldn't have said that, he muttered under his breath. But you need to know there's a lot you don't understand. More people than you think want what's hidden in this place. He started to walk away, and Riley could only stare after him, her mind racing. What had Matt meant? What did he know? The room felt colder now. Riley stood still, processing his words. He wasn't just talking about the factory anymore. He was talking about her father's secret, about the gold, about the history she was beginning to uncover. And he was warning her that she wasn't alone in this search. Her hand tightened around the crowbar. The walls of the factory seemed to close in around her, and the weight of what she was about to uncover pressed on her like a suffocating force. She was no longer just exploring the factory's secrets. She was now part of something far bigger, something dangerous. And it was clear. There were others who would stop at nothing to get what was hidden here. Riley couldn't shake Matt's words as she stood in the dark, the cold air of the factory pressing in around her. His warning echoed in her mind like an alarm bell, but it was the look in his eyes that haunted her the most, the barely masked fear, the way he had almost confessed something he couldn't quite say. She didn't know what he meant by more people being involved, but she was beginning to sense that the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. She needed to get answers, and she needed to be careful. With one last glance at the safe, Riley closed the door to the hidden room and made her way back toward the main floor of the factory. Every step felt heavier, the weight of the secrets pressing on her chest like an invisible hand. She had already uncovered more than she ever thought she would, but it wasn't enough. She had to find out what was really going on here. As she stepped into the daylight, the factory's lot seemed eerily quiet, the wind rustling the overgrown weeds that crept along the edge of the property. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she had been avoiding since her father's funeral. The number for the private investigator her father had hired before his death. She had found a few old files in the office that hinted at her father's involvement with someone in law enforcement, a man named Detective Charles Avery. Riley didn't know why her father had been in contact with him, but it felt like a lead she couldn't ignore. The phone rang once, twice, before it was picked up. Detective Avery speaking. Detective Avery, Riley began, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. This is Riley Monroe. I'm calling about my father. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a low sigh. I thought this call might come, Avery said, his voice gruff. Your father was involved in something bigger than you know, Riley. He tried to keep you out of it for a reason. Riley felt a chill run down her spine. What was he involved in? What did he get himself mixed up with? Avery hesitated, and she could almost hear the hesitation in his voice. I don't have all the details, but I do know this. There's a group out there, a shadow organization, looking for what your father hid in that factory. It's not just gold, Riley. It's information, power, and your father, he was protecting you from it. Riley's heart skipped a beat. Who are they? And why would they want something hidden in a factory? What's so important? I can't explain it all right now, Avery continued, his voice urgent. But you need to stay safe. Trust no one, not even those you think you know. They'll stop at nothing to get what's hidden there. Your father knew this, which is why he made me promise to stay in touch, to make sure you were never alone in this. Riley's grip tightened on her phone, her fingers trembling. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Her father's death had not been an accident. He had been killed because of what he had found in that factory, because of what he had hidden. I need to know more, Riley demanded, her voice low and urgent. What exactly did he find? What's hidden there? I can't say over the phone, Avery replied, his tone strained. But I'll meet you in person. You need to get out of that factory, Riley. It's too dangerous. Come to the diner off Highway 19. I'll be there at 3. I'll explain everything. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Riley stared at the phone in her hand, her heart racing. She didn't know if she could trust the detective, but one thing was clear. She was in deeper than she'd ever imagined. With the phone call still ringing in her ears, Riley turned back toward the factory. The gold, the safe, her father's hidden past it was all connected. And now, there were people who would do anything to get their hands on it. She didn't have much time. She needed answers, and she needed to stay one step ahead. But as she walked away from the factory and toward the diner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The feeling that someone was already onto her, waiting for her to make the next move. Riley's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove along the winding road that led to Highway 19, the trees blurring past her like a fleeting memory. The air outside was thick with humidity, but the heat inside her car felt suffocating. Her mind churned with questions, each one tumbling over the next, as she replayed the conversation with Detective Avery. She barely knew the man, but his words had shaken her to her core. There was a shadow organization, some group that wanted what her father had hidden in the factory. And it wasn't just about the gold. It was about something far more dangerous. What could it be? And why was her father involved in it? As Riley pulled into the parking lot of the diner, she could see Avery's car already parked at the far end. The diner was small, tucked away on the edge of the highway, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the muggy air. It looked as quiet and forgotten as the factory, but Riley knew better now. Nothing here was as simple as it seemed. She parked and stepped out of the car, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something eerie about this meeting, like stepping into a trap, but she had no choice. She needed answers, and Avery was the only one who could give them. The bell above the diner door jingled as she entered. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and grease hit her, and the worn-out booths gave the place a familiar, comforting feel. Avery was sitting in the back booth, nursing a cup of coffee. His gray hair was tousled, and his face, lined with age and experience, looked tired, haunted even. When he saw her, he gave a brief nod and gestured for her to sit. "Riley," he said, his voice gruff, "I'm glad you came. But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. Your father. He wasn't just a businessman. He got mixed up with people you don't want to cross." Riley slid into the booth, her eyes locked on the detective. "I already know that. I know he kept secrets, but I don't know why. What did he find in that factory?" Avery took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room as though checking for eavesdroppers. "Your father found something valuable, Riley. More valuable than you can imagine. And it wasn't just the gold. It was something that could change everything. A series of documents, information that some very dangerous people are willing to kill for." Riley's stomach twisted. "What kind of information?" Avery hesitated before speaking again, his voice lower now. "Blueprints, files, codes. It's related to a deal your father made years ago, something that never should have happened. He got involved with a group that was dealing with more than just manufacturing. They were dealing with power, political, financial, and military power. But the group went rogue, and when your father found out what they were really up to, he had to protect you. He had to get away." The weight of his words settled in Riley's chest, suffocating her. Her father hadn't just been running a factory. He had been running from something, from someone. And all these years, she had been left in the dark. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't he trust me with this?" Avery's eyes softened for a moment. "He wanted to, Riley. But the people he was up against, they would have killed you to get what he had. He thought it would be better for you to live a normal life, away from all this. That's why he kept everything hidden." Riley sat back in the booth, her mind reeling. Her father hadn't just been hiding a factory full of gold, he had been hiding the truth. And the truth was much darker than she could have ever imagined. She stared down at the coffee in front of her, barely touching it. "So, what do I do now?" she asked, her voice strained. "Do I just walk away? Pretend like none of this matters?" Avery leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "You can't walk away from this. There are people out there, Riley. People who want that information. And they know you're connected to it now. They'll come after you. They'll do whatever it takes to get what your father hid." Riley's heart sank. She had already felt the weight of being watched, but now she understood it fully. This wasn't just a simple treasure hunt. This was about survival. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice firm. Avery leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming on the edge of his coffee cup. "We find out everything your father hid, and we destroy it before anyone else can get their hands on it." Riley's eyes narrowed. "You think I can just erase everything? I don't even know what's in that factory yet." Avery sighed, looking down at his coffee. "I don't expect it to be easy, but I can help you, Riley. I can give you the tools you need to get ahead of them, but you have to trust me. You have to stay ahead of the game. They're already moving. and they won't stop until they find what your father left behind." Riley nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. This was no longer just about a factory or a fortune. It was about protecting herself and uncovering the truth. Her father's secrets had led her to this point, but she couldn't go back now. She stood up from the booth, her decision made. "All right, let's do this." Avery's gaze followed her as she walked toward the door. "Be careful, Riley. You're in deeper than you think." As she stepped back into the warm afternoon light, Riley felt a sense of finality wash over her. She couldn't turn back. The game had begun, and there was no escaping it. Riley drove back to the factory in a haze, the weight of her conversation with Avery pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. Every word he had spoken echoed in her mind, reminding her that this was no longer just about finding out what her father had left behind. She was caught in a game that was far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The factory, that had once seemed like a place of dead memories, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Each step she took closer to the truth, bringing her closer to something or someone dangerous. She parked her car outside the factory, the sky growing darker as the sun began to set. The factory stood in front of her, silent and brooding, as though it knew she was returning. Riley stepped out of the car, her gaze lingering on the building's decaying walls. There was a sense of finality in the air now. This was no longer a place of forgotten pasts, it was a battlefield, and she had just entered the war. Her father had hidden something here, something that could change everything, and now she had to find it before someone else did. The only problem? There were people watching. People who would do anything to get their hands on whatever her father had found. She had barely made it to the factory doors when a dark sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dusk. Riley froze. The car stopped, and a man stepped out, his silhouette casting a long shadow on the pavement. She didn't recognize him, but there was something cold in the way he moved, something dangerous. He approached her slowly, his hands in his pockets, his eyes locked on hers. "Riley Monroe?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly. "Who's asking?" Riley replied, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was more of a predatory grin, like he already knew more than he was letting on. "I'm here on behalf of a mutual acquaintance," he said. "Someone who's very interested in what's hidden here, and they want to talk to you." Riley's stomach dropped. She had a sinking feeling she knew exactly who this man was working for. The organization Avery had warned her about, the people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on her father's secrets. "I'm not interested in talking to anyone," Riley said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know who you are, and I don't care." The man took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "That's unfortunate," he said, his tone darkening. "Because you don't have a choice in the matter. You're in over your head, Miss Monroe, and you'll find that the people I work for don't take kindly to those who try to keep secrets from them." Riley's pulse quickened. She had no doubt now this man wasn't just some random stranger. He was connected to the people who were hunting for whatever her father had left behind. But she couldn't let him know that she was scared. She couldn't let him see that she was on the edge of losing control. "I don't know what you're talking about," Riley said, her voice firmer this time. "And if you think you can intimidate me, you've got the wrong person." The man's smile faltered, but only for a second. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black envelope, sliding it across the pavement toward her, with a slow, deliberate motion. "Take a look inside," he said, his eyes cold. "You'll want to." Riley hesitated, but the man didn't move, his gaze unwavering. She bent down and picked up the envelope, her fingers brushing the cold surface. She ripped it open, and inside, she found a single photograph. She turned it over, her heart skipping a beat. It was a picture of her father. But this wasn't the man she remembered. This was a younger version of him, standing in front of a different factory, a different building entirely, one Riley had never seen before. The factory was pristine, its windows gleaming in the sunlight. But it wasn't the factory that grabbed her attention. It was the man standing beside her father, a figure whose face was partially obscured by shadows. "Who is this?" Riley demanded, holding the photo up to the man. "What's going on here?" The man didn't answer right away. He simply smiled again, that same chilling, predatory grin. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, his voice low. "But I suggest you don't waste any more time. We're already moving in, and you don't want to be in our way when we get there." He turned to leave, but paused just before getting into his car. "Don't try to run, Riley," he added, his voice carrying across the empty lot. "You won't get far." The car doors slammed shut, and the engine roared to life as the sedan sped away, disappearing into the night. Riley stood there for a moment, the photo still clutched in her hand. She stared at her father's face, her mind racing. What was this other factory? And why had her father been involved with these people? She had more questions than answers now, and each one was pulling her deeper into a world she had never wanted to be a part of. But there was no turning back. She looked down at the photograph again, determination hardening in her chest. Whoever these people were, they had made one mistake. They had underestimated her. She wasn't just going to sit back and let them take what belonged to her. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. Riley couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. The photo, the man's cryptic warning, and the sinister truth about her father's past all loomed over her like a storm, threatening to break at any moment. She stared at the photograph she'd been handed, her mind trying to make sense of what it meant. The factory in the picture was not the one she knew. It wasn't the factory her father had run into the ground. This was something different, a place that felt like another life, one her father had never shared with her. Who was the man beside him? And why had her father hidden this from her? With a sense of urgency, Riley shoved the photo into her pocket and hurried back into the factory. She needed answers, but she couldn't do this alone anymore. She had to trust someone who could help her piece this puzzle together. Avery was her only lead, but after their conversation earlier, she knew that things had only become more complicated. She had no time to waste. Riley's steps echoed through the dark halls as she made her way to the back of the building. She could feel the eyes of the factory on her, every crack in the walls seeming to whisper secrets she wasn't ready to hear. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Her father's past was her inheritance now, and whatever dangers it entailed, she was going to face them head-on. When she reached the back office, she grabbed the old file cabinets and started rummaging through the papers, looking for any clue, any connection to the photo, the other factory, the mysterious man who had warned her. Her hand shook as she sifted through papers, each document feeling like a part of a life she never knew existed. Finally, a file caught her eye. It was tucked away at the bottom of the drawer, dusty and neglected, as if someone had intentionally hidden it. She opened it, scanning through the contents. The file was a mix of business contracts, plans, and financial documents, but it was the last few pages that caught her attention. There, at the very end, was a detailed map, and just like the one she had seen before, it marked another factory location, one that was never mentioned in any of the documents she'd seen up until now. This one was different, bigger, more sophisticated, and it was labeled with a name she didn't recognize. Redoubt Industries. Her pulse quickened. Redoubt Industries. The name rang no bells, but it was clear this was the key. The key to understanding everything that had happened to her father and what was now happening to her. As she was about to stand up, the sharp ring of her phone broke the silence. She froze. The caller ID read, unknown. Riley hesitated for a moment, her gut telling her that she shouldn't pick it up, but she didn't have a choice. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tight with caution. "Riley," came the voice on the other end. It was a man's voice, smooth, calm, too calm. "I think we need to have a conversation." Riley's stomach dropped. She recognized the voice. It was the man from the factory, the one who had handed her the photograph. "I'm not interested in talking to you," Riley said, her hand tightening around the phone. "Oh, but I think you are," the man replied, his tone a mix of amusement and menace. "You've been looking for answers. You've been digging where you shouldn't. But here's the thing, Riley. You're out of your depth. The people I work for don't like their secrets uncovered. And you've found one of the biggest ones." Riley's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure how he knew what she had found. But she knew one thing. He wasn't just playing games. He was giving her a warning. "I'm not afraid of you," Riley said, her voice more forceful now. "I'm going to find the truth, no matter what." The man chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down her spine. "We'll see about that," he said, before the line went dead. Riley stood there, her fingers still clutching the phone, her mind racing. The walls were closing in, and every new piece of information seemed to make everything more dangerous. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. She had to know what was hidden, and she had to stop whoever was trying to keep it buried. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke her concentration. Riley turned toward the door, her breath catching in her chest. Someone was coming. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Her heart pounded as the door swung open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was Matt. His face was pale, his expression filled with fear. "Riley," he said, his voice trembling. "You need to get out of here. Now." Riley stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? I'm not leaving. Not yet. There's no time. You don't understand," Matt said, his voice urgent. "They're here. They're already here." Before Riley could respond, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep within the factory, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on concrete. Someone was coming for her. And this time, there was no running. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Riley's heart raced as she turned to Matt, who was visibly shaken, his eyes darting nervously toward the factory doors. "You don't understand, Riley," he repeated, his voice tight with fear. "You've triggered something. They know you're here. They know everything." Riley felt a cold chill run down her spine. The man's warning, the photographs, and the strange name Redoubt Industries were now haunting her every thought. There was no way out anymore, not without answers. "Who are they?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What do you know about them, Matt?" Matt hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder, as though the walls themselves might be listening. Finally, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wasn't supposed to tell you this," he said quietly, "but I've worked for them. For Redoubt Industries. I was a part of the operation, just a small piece, but enough to know how dangerous it is." Riley's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? You worked for them?" Matt nodded, his face pale and grim. "I was supposed to keep track of the factory's assets, but when I realized what they were really after, I backed off. I tried to get out, but it's not that easy. They have people everywhere." Riley's head spun. This was the last thing she had expected to hear. Matt, someone she had trusted, had been involved with the very group she was running from. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "I couldn't," he said, shaking his head. "They would have come after me and you. The moment they knew you were looking into your father's past, they'd come for you. They want the documents, the blueprints, everything he was hiding." Riley didn't know how to process what he was saying. Everything she thought she knew about the factory, about her father, it was all unraveling before her. And yet, despite the overwhelming fear, something deep inside told her that she had to keep going. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Suddenly, the door to the office slammed open. Riley's heart skipped a beat as two men entered, wearing dark suits and sunglasses, their faces unreadable. Their presence filled the room with tension. "You're too late, Riley," one of them said, his voice low and commanding. "We've been tracking you for days. It's over." Riley backed up, her mind racing for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. She could feel the cold steel of the truth closing in on her. They were here to take what her father had hidden, and they weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice betrayed her fear. "You'll never get it. It's buried too deep," the man smirked. "Oh, we already know where it is. Your father's little legacy is ours now, and you're going to help us get it." Before Riley could react, Matt stepped forward, blocking her path. No, she's not going anywhere with you. Not while I'm still breathing. The two men exchanged a glance, and in an instant, they were on him. Riley shouted in surprise, but Matt was already on the ground, struggling to fight them off. One of the men held him down, while the other advanced on Riley. Riley felt the panic rise in her chest, but something else ignited within her, a spark of defiance. She couldn't let them take Matt. She couldn't let them win. Without thinking, Riley grabbed the crowbar from the corner of the room and swung it at the nearest man, catching him off guard. He staggered back, and for a moment, Riley thought she might actually have a chance. But the other man quickly regained control, grabbing her wrist and twisting it. "You really think you can stop us?" he sneered. "I don't care what you think," Riley spat back. "I'm not going down without a fight." Just as the man tightened his grip, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the factory. Both men turned in surprise, and Riley used the moment of distraction to break free. She pushed the man away and ran toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Riley, get out of here." Matt's voice rang out, weak but determined. "Go. Run." Riley didn't need any more encouragement. She sprinted through the factory, the echo of her footsteps ringing in her ears. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let them catch her. As she burst out into the parking lot, she saw a familiar figure standing by the road. Detective Avery. He was holding a gun, and his expression was grim as he looked toward the factory. "They're not going to stop," Riley said breathlessly, stopping in front of him. "They know everything. They're coming for me." Avery nodded grimly. "They've been watching you for a long time, Riley. But we can still stop them. You don't have to do this alone anymore." As Riley caught her breath, she glanced back at the factory one last time. The past, her father's legacy, and the truth were all buried in there. But it wasn't just about the treasure anymore. It was about surviving. It was about protecting the life she had left. She turned to Avery, her resolve hardening. "Then let's finish it. Together." The two of them walked toward the road, the factory now behind them. The mystery wasn't over, but with Avery by her side, Riley knew she could finally take control of her own future.